Welcome to J.Reddit, the place where we dive into the wildest, craziest, and sometimes most heartbreaking stories people share online. Every day, thousands of people post their secrets, their struggles, their drama, and their shocking life updates. And we're here to go through the best of them together. Some will make you laugh, some will make you cry, and some will make you sit back and thank the universe that you're not in their shoes. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's get into today's stories because, trust me, these ones are on a whole different level. When you're 19, the world feels big and confusing. You're barely an adult, just getting used to living away from home, trying to balance school and work, and if you're lucky, maybe you've had a little taste of dating. But our story today is about a 19-year-old who had none of that. He was shy, awkward, never had a girlfriend, never really even knew what it meant to be in a relationship. He thought maybe he'd figure it out slowly. Maybe he'd meet someone his age at school. Maybe stumble into something normal. But instead, he found himself in something that looked like a fantasy from the outside but quickly turned into a nightmare once he was inside. He was working a part-time job at a small, local business. Nothing special, just a way to earn some money for books, food, and a little independence. The owner of that business was a woman in her late 30s, twice his age, recently divorced, and the kind of person who carried herself with absolute confidence. She wasn't shy, she wasn't subtle, and from the very beginning, she made it obvious she liked him. At first, he didn't even notice. He wasn't used to attention from women at all, so when she complimented him, touched his hand a little too long, or leaned in closer than necessary, he thought that was just her personality. He figured she was being friendly. He didn't realize he was being targeted. Weeks turned into months, and her behavior got bolder. She teased him. She called him cute. She made suggestive comments he barely understood. And then one night, she stopped dancing around it and asked him directly if he wanted to come to her place. Imagine being 19, never having dated, never having kissed someone properly, and suddenly an older, experienced woman is looking you in the eye and saying, "Come over tonight." He said yes. He didn't know what else to say. That night, they slept together, and for him, it was his very first time. For her, it was just another night. But for him, it was a life-changing moment. From that night forward, they were in what he thought was a relationship. At first, he was excited. He thought maybe he was lucky. His friends would probably think he was living every young guy's dream, dating someone older, confident, attractive, with money and her life together. But the reality wasn't so simple. From the very beginning, she wanted intimacy constantly. Not just when they were alone, not just on dates, but all the time. Even at work, she would call him into her office, not to discuss business, but to kiss him or touch him. He didn't even have time to process his feelings. He was 19, brand new to this, and already being pressured into things he wasn't comfortable with. If he hesitated or said no, she'd act, hurt, pout, or even guilt him. Until he gave in. He didn't know what was normal, so he thought maybe this was just how relationships worked. Then the gifts started. One day, she overheard him saying his old laptop barely worked anymore. A week later, she surprised him with a brand new, top-of-the-line laptop. For most 19-year-olds, that would have felt like Christmas morning, but for him, it felt wrong. He wasn't used to being spoiled. He didn't like the feeling of debt it created. Every expensive gift felt like invisible chains wrapping tighter around him. He could feel that now. She expected more of him, that her generosity wasn't free. Even though she never said it directly, the message was clear. I give you this, and in return, you give me what I want. The nights were the hardest. His phone would buzz at 1 or 2 in the morning with long, drunk texts from her. Sometimes it was angry rants about her ex-husband. Sometimes it was bitter paragraphs about how men were stupid and shallow. And sometimes it was desperate confessions about how he was the only one who truly understood her. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know whether to comfort her, ignore her, or apologize for things he hadn't done. If he didn't reply, she'd accuse him of not caring. If he said he was tired, she'd guilt-trip him. If he said he wanted to hang out with friends, she'd act like he was betraying her. It wasn't just a relationship anymore, it was control. Slowly, he began to dread her messages. That knot in his stomach tightened every time his phone lit up. He questioned himself constantly. Was this normal? Was he being ungrateful? Was he too immature to handle a real relationship? Or was something actually wrong here? He didn't know. Because he had no experience. He had no frame of reference. He thought maybe all girlfriends act like this. Maybe every couple deals with late night rants and pressure. He thought maybe the problem was him. Finally, in his confusion, he turned to Reddit. He laid everything out. The constant pressure for intimacy, the expensive gifts that made him feel trapped, the drunk emotional rants, the guilt trips. And then he asked the question, is this what relationships are supposed to be like? Or is there something wrong here? The internet did not hesitate. The replies came pouring in. Strangers told him this wasn't healthy. They told him she wasn't his girlfriend. She was a manipulator. They said she was using her age, experience, and money to control him. And that she liked the fact he was young and inexperienced because it made him easier to bend to her will. They told him flat out that this wasn't love. This was a sugar mama situation, where she gave him things and expected ownership of his time and body in return. Reading those comments, something inside him shifted. Deep down, he already knew it. Every time she demanded attention, every time she threw a tantrum when he said no, every time she handed him a gift that felt more like a debt, he knew this wasn't right. He just needed someone to say it out loud. For the first time, he realized the knot in his stomach wasn't just anxiety. It was his gut telling him to get out. But knowing the truth and acting on it are two very different things. He didn't know how to break up with someone. He didn't know how she would react. He thought maybe he could wait. Maybe he could ease out slowly. He was nervous, uncertain, scared of what would happen if he confronted her. He had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Because just 3 days later, he came back with an update. And friends, that's when the mask came off. That's when things escalated from uncomfortable to terrifying. That's when she stopped pretending to be the fun, generous girlfriend and revealed just how far she was willing to go to keep control. Asterisk 3 days passed after his first post. And in that time, he tried to figure out what to do. He told himself he'd wait for the right moment to break things off. Maybe he'd see her in person, sit her down, and explain calmly. But life doesn't always give you the neat, polite ending you plan for. Instead, one night, his phone buzzed with a new message. From her. This one wasn't a drunken rant. It wasn't a sweet compliment. It was explicit. A detailed message about what she wanted to do to him, and in order to come over in half an hour, he stared at the screen, exhausted and sick of the pressure. And finally, typed back the word he had been afraid to say, no. She didn't take it well. At first, she insisted, telling him not to be shy, telling him he didn't really mean no. When he stayed firm, she got upset. She told him he was being unfair, that he was rejecting her, that after everything she had done for him, he couldn't just blow her off like that. And that was the moment he realized there would never be a good time. Never be an easy way. So he just told her right then, over text, that it was over. He thanked her for the time they'd shared, told her he wanted something different in a relationship, and said it was best to move on. She didn't accept it. Not at all. For hours that night, she kept messaging him. Why are you doing this? What did I do wrong? Is there anything I can change? He stayed calm, repeating that it just wasn't working. That he wanted to end things. That it wasn't a debate. Eventually, the messages stopped, and he thought maybe, just maybe, it was done. But when he woke up the next morning, his phone was flooded. Dozens of messages! Angry, bitter, cruel. She called him a shallow loser. She said he was just like every other stupid boy who runs after college girls. She said she thought he was special, but he turned out to be worthless. That was bad enough. But then things escalated. Later that day, as he walked back to his dorm for lunch, she was waiting for him. She knew where he lived. She knew his routine. She jumped out in front of him and started yelling, calling him immature, ungrateful, telling him he'd never find anyone better. He tried to walk past her, but she followed, berating him the whole way. He thought that would be it, but it wasn't. That evening, when he went out to get dinner, she cornered him again. She demanded to know why he wasn't answering her messages. Why? He'd blocked her number. When he told her plainly that he didn't want to talk to her anymore, she exploded. She screamed that he was a cowardly piece of trash, that no one else would ever want him, that he'd die alone. The words cut deep. For someone who had always struggled with women, who had always felt unwanted, hearing her say that fed every insecurity he had. Part of him wondered if she was right, if he had just ruined his only chance at ever being with someone. But the larger part of him knew he couldn't keep living like this. He couldn't stay chained to someone who stalked him, insulted him, and tried to control him. The next day, it happened again. He was on his way to grab lunch when she ambushed him for a third time. This time, she screamed even louder, saying he was shallow, stupid, and too blind to appreciate a real woman. She told him she hoped he died alone. He'd had enough. He told her straight to her face that if she didn't stop, he would contact the authorities. Then he turned and walked away. And that's exactly what he did. He went to campus security! He called the local police. He explained everything. He unblocked her number just long enough to send one last message. That he had reported her behavior. That if she kept harassing him, there would be consequences. She replied immediately, calling him a coward again. But this time, he didn't argue. He blocked her for good. For the first time in weeks, the messages stopped. The yelling stopped. The ambushes stopped. She vanished, at least for the moment. And he should have felt relief, but instead, he just felt drained. Because even though the harassment had paused, the damage was already done. He sat in his dorm room, replaying every word she had said. About how he was immature. About how no one would ever want him. About how he was nothing without her. He knew, logically, those were just her attempts to hurt him, to make him crawl back. But deep down, they hit the sorest parts of his self-esteem. He admitted in his update that this had taken a serious emotional toll on him. One of the only women who had ever shown him attention had turned into a nightmare. Someone he used to like, someone he even respected, now hated his guts and was doing everything she could to tear him down. He said he didn't doubt for a second that he had made the right decision, but he couldn't help asking why it had gone so wrong so fast. How someone could flip from being sweet and generous to cruel and vindictive overnight. And of course, the commenters gave him the blunt truth. They told him she hadn't flipped overnight. She had always been that person. The signs were there. From the start, the pressure, the gifts, the emotional manipulation. The only thing that changed was that he stopped playing along. She hadn't become crazy. She had just dropped the mask. That's when it hit him. It wasn't that he had ruined his only chance. It wasn't that he was unworthy of love. It was that his first relationship had been with someone who never wanted love in the first place. She wanted control. And once she lost it, she lashed out. He finally understood that leaving her wasn't the end of his dating life. It was the beginning. Because now, he knew what red flags to watch for. Now, he knew what love wasn't. Asterisk, after he blocked her for the final time, life became strangely quiet. 4 days, he found himself checking over his shoulder whenever he left his dorm, half expecting her to be lurking around the corner, ready to ambush him again. At first, every vibration of his phone made his chest tighten, thinking it might be another string of hateful messages. But slowly, as the silence stretched on, he realized she was really gone. At least for now. That should have been a relief. But instead, he found himself weighed down by everything that had already happened. He replayed it all in his head, the way she would pout when he said no, the way she shoved expensive gifts into his life like shackles, the way she went from begging him to stay to calling him a loser who would never be loved. He knew, logically, that her words came from anger, not truth, but the scars were still there. When you're 19 and still trying to figure out who you are, it's easy to let someone else's voice sink into your bones. He admitted that part of him still wondered why she had turned on him so viciously. Why someone who once called him special could later hope he would die alone. It seemed impossible to reconcile those two sides of her. But as commenters pointed out, it wasn't two sides, it was the same person all along. She hadn't changed overnight. She had simply been showing him the parts she wanted him to see until he no longer played along. And once he understood that, something inside him shifted. He began to realize that leaving her wasn't a failure. It wasn't proof that he was unlovable. It was proof that he had boundaries, even if it took him longer to find them. She had tested him with manipulation, with guilt, with cruelty, and in the end, he had still said no. For the first time, he felt a flicker of pride. Of course, it wasn't easy. There were nights when her words echoed in his mind, when he lay awake, wondering if maybe she had been right, if maybe no one else would ever want him. There were moments when he missed the attention, even if it came wrapped in chaos, because at least it made him feel wanted. But then he'd remember the look on her face when she ambushed him, the venom in her voice when she screamed insults in the middle of campus, and the knot in his stomach would return. That was not love. That was not care. That was a cage. So he started focusing on himself. He threw himself into schoolwork, into spending more time with friends, into rebuilding his confidence. And slowly, the idea of being single stopped feeling like a punishment and started feeling like freedom. He didn't have to answer midnight texts. He didn't have to walk 45 minutes to someone's house every time they demanded it. He didn't have to feel guilty for wanting a night to himself. For the first time, he could breathe. He said that he wanted to understand what went wrong so he wouldn't end up in the same place again. And the truth is, nothing went wrong with him. He didn't make a mistake by being kind or by saying yes to her at the start. His only mistake was ignoring the voice in his gut that told him something was off. That's the lesson he carried with him the next time. He'd listen to that voice. The next time, he'd trust himself. And that, friends, is what makes this story so powerful. It wasn't about losing a girlfriend. It wasn't about surviving a stalker. It was about learning what love should never feel like. Love should never feel like pressure. It should never feel like guilt. It should never feel like a gift you can't refuse. And it should never, ever feel like fear. So even though his first relationship ended in chaos, even though it left him shaken and scarred, it also gave him something important. It gave him clarity. It gave him the strength to walk away from toxicity. And it gave him the chance to start over with open eyes. He may have lost her, but in the process, he found himself. Relationships are never just about two people. No matter how much you want to believe that love exists in a bubble, sooner or later family steps into the picture. And when that family is supportive, it can make a relationship stronger. But when the family is toxic, manipulative, or just plain obsessed, it can feel like you're fighting a war you didn't sign up for. Today's story is about exactly that. And if you thought the Sugar Mama story was crazy, wait until you hear about this sister who blurred the lines between sibling and something else entirely. The girl telling this story had been dating her boyfriend for over 3 years. They had a stable relationship, something that had grown naturally over time. She wasn't naive. She wasn't rushing into anything, and she genuinely believed she had found someone she could see a future with. For a while, things were good. But then, she started noticing his sister's behavior. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe his sister was just protective. Maybe she was just really close to her brother. But over time, it became impossible to ignore the way she acted. It started with the calls. If her boyfriend didn't answer his phone, his sister would call again. And again. Not once or twice, but 5 or 6 times in a row. And when he didn't answer, she'd fire off 5 or 6 texts demanding to know where he was, who he was with, and when he would be home. Imagine being out at dinner, trying to enjoy your night, and your partner's phone is vibrating non-stop. Because his sister is having a meltdown over not knowing his exact schedule. That was their reality. It wasn't an occasional thing either. It happened constantly. Then came the tracking. Opa found out his sister had his location shared. At first, that didn't sound too unusual. Plenty of siblings and families share their location for safety. But she wasn't just glancing at it once in a while. She was glued to it, monitoring him constantly. If he went somewhere, she wanted to know. If he hung out with friends, she had to know who they were. And sometimes, she didn't even bother asking. She would just show up. Imagine being at the park with your boyfriend and suddenly his sister appears out of nowhere because she saw you on her phone. That's not family concern. That's obsession. And then came the moment OP could never forget. One evening, she and her boyfriend were lying in bed together, watching a show. They weren't doing anything inappropriate, just relaxing. His sister barged into the room without knocking, looked at him and said, "My love, your phone is going to die." My love. That's what you call a partner, not a sibling. OP froze, stunned into silence. She didn't know whether to laugh or scream. She thought maybe she had misheard, but now she was dead serious. It didn't stop there. On another occasion, the sister came into his room while his shirt was off, sat down next to him, and ran her hand across his chest as if that was completely normal. Opie was horrified. This wasn't protectiveness. This wasn't closeness. This was something else. Something unhealthy. Something that felt wrong on every level. Over time, it became clear that his sister saw herself as more than just his sibling. She acted like a second girlfriend. If Opie and her boyfriend hung out with friends, the sister would send passive-aggressive texts like, "Thanks for cheating on us," or "Thanks for not inviting us." She made it sound like she and her brother were a couple being betrayed. It was creepy. It was invasive. And the strangest part was that she wasn't single. She had been in a relationship of her own for 8 years. She was even engaged. But instead of focusing on her fiancé, she was clinging to her brother. Dottup tried to talk to her boyfriend about it, but he struggled to stand up to his sister. Every time he tried to set boundaries, she'd overreact and run to their mom. And their mom, instead of encouraging independence, would scold him. She'd ask OP directly why he wasn't talking to his sister enough, as if it was her fault. The whole family dynamic was suffocating. It wasn't just a relationship between two people anymore. It felt like she was fighting against his entire family. Things got worse when her boyfriend started a new job. He was exhausted from long shifts, barely had the energy to talk to anyone, let alone entertain his sister's constant demands. But instead of understanding, his sister flipped out. She convinced herself he was mad at her. She complained to their mom, who then complained to Opie. The cycle was endless sister cries. Mom pressures, Ope gets blamed, and yet Opie stayed. She loved her boyfriend, and he loved her. But the strain was growing. She started wondering if this was sustainable. If she could ever really have a relationship without his sister trying to wedge herself between them. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself maybe the sister would move on once she got married. Maybe she'd finally focus on her own life, instead of clinging to her brother's. But deep down, she knew things were building toward a break-in point. That breaking point would come in the most bizarre way imaginable. But for now, this is where part 1 leaves us with a girlfriend trapped in a relationship, not just with her partner, but with his sister too, watching in horror as the boundaries between family and something else blurred more with each passing day. Asterisk, it didn't take long before the situation spun completely out of control. Opie thought she had seen the worst already. But she had no idea how far her boyfriend's sister was willing to go to keep her claws in him. The phone calls and the location stalking were creepy enough, but then came the night when everything truly boiled over. It was a Friday, sometime after 1 in the morning, when her phone began to ring. She looked at the screen and saw no caller ID. At first she ignored it, figuring it was spam, but then it rang again. And again? By the third call, she started to get nervous. Then, her boyfriend's phone lit up too. Whoever it was, they weren't going to stop. Finally, they answered, and that's when the voices started. On the other end of the line were 2 girls. They were loud, messy, talking over each other, and they claimed they had been with OP's boyfriend. Not just once, but twice one night the week before, and another night just the other day. They tried to act convincing, painting half-baked stories about where they met him, how he treated them, and what they had done together. At first, OP was stunned. She knew her boyfriend, and none of it sounded right. The details were shaky, inconsistent, and then it clicked. The voices sounded familiar. Too familiar! She realized with a jolt that one of the voices belonged to his sister, and the other was her friend. Op's stomach dropped. She couldn't believe it at first. Who would do something so cruel, so twisted? But as the calls kept coming, 15s into Taru, she had no doubt. It was them. They were pretending to be random girls, trying to convince her that her boyfriend was cheating. They wanted to break them up, to sabotage their relationship by planting seeds of doubt. Finally, OP snapped. She called them out by name. The line went quiet for a moment before they fumbled and laughed nervously. They were caught. Later, when confronted again, the sister admitted it, but brushed it off as if it was nothing. She said it was just a joke. A joke. As if calling in the middle of the night and pretending to be mistresses was funny, Op wasn't laughing. She was furious. This wasn't just immature. It was malicious. It was manipulative. It was sick. For her boyfriend, it was the final straw. Up until then, he had tried to excuse his sister's behavior. He told himself she was just overprotective. He avoided confrontation because he didn't want to cause drama. But this time, there was no excuse. His sister had tried to sabotage his relationship on purpose. She had crossed a line so far, there was no way back. He decided then and there that he was done. No more sharing his location. No more daily phone calls. No more excuses. He cut her off completely.